What's the best age to start learning English? How many languages can you learn? We look at some language learning facts in this episode of
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And together with nearly 50 years of teaching English between us, we're going to help you grow your grammar, vocalize your vocabulary, and perfect your pronunciation, taking all aspects of your English up to the next level. How are you, Reza?
I'm very well, Craig, although I feel a little bit sweaty, I must admit.
You're sweating?
I'm a bit sweaty, sweaty, because the weather is a bit close, isn't it?
It's a bit close. It's a bit humid. It's warm. It's cloudy and close. So maybe you stay on that side of the desk. I'll stay on this side of the desk, and then I won't get your sweatiness.
That's the best way, yeah. So you're lucky you don't have to visually watch me, listeners, sweating away.
You look very smart today. I like your shirt, by the way.
My sweat-soaked shirt.
This week we're speaking about statistics in language learning and looking at some research to help you learn effectively. But before that, Reza, we have a message from our friend Mariela from Ecuador.
Hello, Rose and Craig. This is Mariela from Ecuador. It is my pleasure to speak with you again. And let me tell you that while I was driving and listening to you, I had an idea that maybe you can use in your podcast. My idea is that you find some researchers or statistics or scientific studies that explain to us how difficult or easy is study a new language. Maybe you can find some facts that teach us about what is the best age to start studying a new language, which is the best option to study. For example, going to an academy or studying by yourself, taking online courses, or maybe traveling around the world. I would like to know about which is the first skill that you have to develop. For example, you have to listen before speak or read before write. I don't know. I would like to know how many languages can a person learn and in what time in average takes to learn a new language. Thank you for your effort and let me tell you that you are great. Thank you. Kisses and bye.
Well, thank you very much, Mariela, for your lovely, lovely voice message, your excellent pronunciation, and your very good English. Wasn't that lovely, Reza?
That was lovely, and the best test is that we understood every word of it. Well, I did. Did you?
I did, and I didn't find anything that she could improve on. Did you?
Well, I did find one little thing that you could improve on.
Surprise, surprise.
I understood everything, and that is the main point of a language, isn't it? To communicate. So what's the best way to learn a language? The way that helps you best communicate, and you communicated perfectly. However, a very, 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 very typical mistake of foreigners is the pronunciation of the plural of language. One language, two languages. People forget to add the extra syllable. So one language, two languages. And also one other little thing. I think you said the word age, but I wasn't quite sure of your pronunciation of the first vowel. Mind you, maybe Craig isn't quite sure of my pronunciation. Because
of which word?
Of the same word, because in Northern Ireland we pronounce it a particular way as well. We say age.
Age.
But according to the Oxford English Dictionary, it would be something like age.
Yeah, the same sound as in my name, Craig. Age. That's interesting.
You didn't quite pronounce it that way, Mariella, but I understood you. That is the most important thing.
And your questions are very interesting. We have done some research on your questions. The first thing to look at, what is the best age to start learning English. Now, in the school where Reza and I teach English, they're beginning now, is it 3 or 2 years old?
Definitely 3, possibly 2 in the future.
So that's very, very young. And it's true that young children don't actually learn a language. Obviously, they're not learning grammar rules and verb tables, but they acquire it because they are immersed in it. To immerse is sumergir, and total immersion is where the baby hears the language, the target language, all around. So they just assimilate it. It just goes in their ears, and that's how they acquire it.
Yes, so Mariela, there is research on this, but there's no need to really quote you any specific research because common sense tells you the answer as well. What is the best age? The best age is from 0. The sooner the better. Mm-hmm. So if it's possible, but that's the thing, for most people it's not going to be possible, but if it is possible, then as soon as a baby is born, expose it to foreign languages. Now, many years ago there was a theory that was actually a bad idea. If you read old literature from more than 40, 50 years ago, it might tell you that that's dangerous for the baby, that the baby will be confused. It won't know what language is speaking, and therefore, it'll be mucked up for the future. But we now know that that is just not true. The baby might not know that it's hearing and even trying to copy several languages, but it doesn't matter. As long as it's exposed to them, as Craig says, and then eventually there comes a time when it learns to sort it out into the different languages. Sort out is sortear. So it knows, okay, silla is Spanish and chair is English, and the baby works it out automatically. So a baby from newborn or even in the womb, they've researched that as well. Before the baby is born, why not expose the unborn baby to people speaking a foreign language? There's a theory that the baby in the womb can hear a little bit of what's going on outside.
I think they've done research, or they have done research on this, and that they've proven that the baby cries with an accent because they have heard the accent in the womb.
Wow.
And they've actually studied that. We've got some other research data from an article on the BBC, and there's a link in the show notes. As babies, we have a better ear for different sounds. That expression, to have an ear for something, that does not mean you only have one ear. That means obviously you have 2 ears, but you can have an ear for music. If music is easier for you to understand and play than another person, then the expression to have an ear for music is used, or to have an eye for photography. So babies have a better ear for different sounds. And also toddlers. Now, what's a toddler, Reza? A toddler's not exactly a baby, is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. As far as I know, there's no one specific word in Spanish language for that. To toddle is a verb. To toddle is to do something between kind of crawling, which is moving along the floor but not walking on your feet, and walking on your feet properly. So toddling is kind of somewhere in the middle. So when a baby's kind of half walking, it's learning to walk. It's at that stage, it's a toddler.
It's when they're walking and you think they're going to fall over any second because they're not very sure, they're not stable on their feet, they're toddling. So toddlers can pick up native accents with astonishing speed. They can really get accents and language quickly at that age. As adults, we have longer attention spans. A span is a period of time. So obviously, when we grow up, we can focus our attention for a longer time on learning a language than children can. And we also have very crucial skills like literacy that allow us to expand our vocabulary. A crucial skill, an essential skill, a skill that's very important. So as adults, we can pay more attention, and we have learning skills that we can use to learn a language.
Yes, though don't confuse attention span with memory. Adults have a better attention span generally than children, but younger people have a good memory. They can keep the information in their mind. I'm talking about short-term memory, like things that they've been doing in the last few days or hours. They can keep that information much better. As we all know, very old people often forget what they've had for lunch, but they remember their childhood.
Me too. I don't think I'm very old, but I forget what I had for lunch.
I never forget what I have for lunch when I eat here, because I have the best lunches in my life here. But yes, older people often forget things. So they have a good attention span. They can pay attention for a long time, but they might forget it quickly. Whereas a good advantage for young learners of languages, they remember the things that they learn for a long time.
Yeah. And as we grow up and we have different life stages, we have different advantages in language learning. For example, as Reza said, when you are older, your memory isn't as sharp. We use the adjective sharp to describe a very good memory. But we may have more motivation to learn a language and more time. Many retired people who are in their 70s and 80s, they have the time and they really, really want to learn a language, especially if they're traveling. So they have the time, they have the motivation, which helps them also to learn a language very well.
Apart from age, of course, there are very important factors aside from that, such as social circumstances. Your social position, your social class. Are you very, very well off? That means you have a very comfortable life, plenty of money, you're in a good position, a good job. Or do you have to work many, many, many hours, tiring hours in a factory? And so when you've finished work, you don't have much energy left to learn a language. All of these things are very important. Can you think of any other factors, Craig?
Get a boyfriend, get a girlfriend, or just a friend online. If you find someone who you can become friends with and get close to, then obviously if they're speaking your target language, the target language is the language you want to learn, then obviously it's much easier to speak the language and acquire the language.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this in a podcast, but well, we can always edit this later. I have a suggestion. Make love in a foreign language.
How do you make love in a foreign language? Do you usually speak when you make?
Well, if the odd word comes out, why not say it in the foreign language? Let's see what happens.
I'd say it in French.
Yeah, French is a good language.
It's very romantic.
Italian maybe as well, bellissima. No, whatever. Try to make love in a foreign language. Even better if you can make love with a foreigner and get them to speak.
Yeah.
Because you can't get a much deeper connection than that, really.
Now, young children are not usually very good at what we call explicit language learning. That means learning languages using rules and paying attention for a long time, using memory. So, yes, young children are like sponges. They really absorb the language and the sounds and the pronunciation and the accent. But as far as learning grammar rules are concerned, adults are probably, they have a better brain for that.
Yeah, you mentioned memory. Yeah, young children don't have such a good memory. When I mentioned younger people having a memory, it was for older children and younger adults. And the reason that younger children don't remember things as well is they just don't want to. Mm-hmm. They've researched this and they've discovered that they could, but they only remember what they want to, and they don't want to remember about the present perfect in English. It doesn't really interest them. They wanted to remember what they did on Halloween, for example. That interests them. Present perfect, who cares about that? So they choose not to remember it. So they have the capability, but they're not going to remember English language grammar rules. Doesn't interest them that much.
And this information is backed up by studies in Spain and Israel. Backed up means supported, the phrasal verb to back something up, to support it. So studies in those two countries showed that adults were better at understanding and applying language rules than children.
I guess adults just in general know that there are kind of rules in life, and if you follow them, you kind of you stay out of trouble and you get things done. I guess children haven't quite learned that yet. Follow the rules more or less and you'll be okay. And that applies to languages as well. If you try and be original and stuff, yeah, that you could be successful. You could be the next Shakespeare or Cervantes because they broke the rules, and it's the rule breakers that are the creative people. But when you're beginning, it's probably not a good idea. You got to learn the rules first.
Yeah, it's like painting. You learn the basics and then you can experiment and be a Picasso. Another study at MIT in America, North America, MIT is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology up in Boston. They showed that to achieve native-like knowledge of English grammar, so to have grammar that's similar to a native speaker, like Reza and I, it's best to start by about 10 years old. So that is the optimum age, the best age for children to start learning grammar and really internalizing the rules of grammar of a language.
Oh, that's interesting. So not much before that, at that age. So if you start at about 7, you're not optimizing your learning time. It's not going to sink in as much.
For grammar.
For grammar, yeah.
The structure of the language. Okay. So the study also showed that we can keep getting better at languages, including our own, over time. So do you widen or extend your English vocabulary actively?
Oh yeah, I do.
How do you do it?
When I come across, that means by chance, I see new things. I come across new words. I look them up in a dictionary. You might think, God, should Reza be doing a podcast about English if he has to look up words? Of course I have to look up words.
Do you mean to tell me, Reza, after 25 years of teaching English, that there are words in the English language that you do not know? I'm shocked.
I'm gonna guess that I don't know about 70% of the words in the English language. If you include all technical words and specialist words. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a carpenter. I'm not a researcher. I'm not many things. I'm not a footballer. I don't know words that those people know. Of course not. Yeah. And yet they're words. So nobody can know anywhere near all the words in a language. A word I learned this week was local. I thought it was a mistake because a Spanish student had written it. And I thought, local? They wrote locales, plural. I thought, they mean locales. Like a bar is un local agradable, a nice place. I thought, no, they surely don't mean that. But I just checked it. And there is the word in English, local.
Oh, really?
Locale, but it's a very academic word. And it means the very philosophical, academic, and I learned it this week, the place where the action and everything is set and where it takes place. So I
didn't know that either.
There you go. So, and that was a Spanish student who wrote that word. So they knew the word before me. This often happens. However, you could live a long life and die and never use the word locale in English and there'll be no problem whatsoever. However, if you don't know the verb to be and food and a few things like that, you're going to be in trouble.
So I think the takeaway from this, the thing to take away and remember, the important thing is that it's a process. It's a constant process of learning and improving. And it's never too late. It's never too late to learn, even if you're in your 80s or your 90s. So just keep learning.
A question people often ask is, did Mariella ask? I can't remember. How many languages can a person learn? Did she ask that?
Yes, she did.
She did? Well, there's a lot of research, Mariella, and all listeners, that suggests that bilingual people who speak 2 languages as their first language, or even trilingual people who speak 3, that native bilingual, trilingual speakers are at an advantage when it comes to learning more languages which are not native to them. It might be because they're already used to switching, to changing between languages frequently, whether they're naturally gifted or not. So it doesn't mean that they were born with a natural capacity to learn languages. No, just the fact that they are bilingual, their brain is accustomed to, it's used to switching. I'll give you an example. Here in Spain, plenty of people grow up speaking Spanish and Catalan. Or in South America, Spanish and Quechua. Or in India, Hindi and Punjabi. In China, Mandarin Chinese and Cantonese. They speak both every day as their first language. And so their brain already has the idea that you can switch between languages. And it's thought that they're at an advantage. Have you heard that theory?
Yeah, I have heard that. But how many languages can a person actually learn? Now, a person who speaks more than one language, as Reza said, bilingual, but a person who's learning different languages is called a polyglot. And there are people who are hyper polyglots, that they learn many, many languages. And there's a book called Babel No More, written by Michael Erd, and there's a link in the show notes, and he lists some people who have learned many languages. Graham Cansdale, for example, knows 14 languages. He uses all of those languages regularly and professionally because he's a translator at the European Commission in Brussels. So there you go, Reza, 14 languages. Is there someone in the book who speaks more than 14?
Yes, there's also a person called Lom Kato who speaks 16 languages. This woman is a Hungarian polyglot. By the way, Hungarian is a very, very tricky language as it happens. And she said that 5 of these lived inside her.
Wow.
So they're like part of her, they're natural to her. And 5 others, she said, needed at least half a day of revision in order to be reactivated. And the other 6 she could do as translation, although maybe they're not quite as fluent. But 16 is not bad.
And she also said that confidence is really, really important. It's crucial. 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 Really, really important to language learning. So there you go. There's a tip. Be confident. Go and speak to whoever you can. Don't be shy. And the more confidence you have, the more you speak, the more you practice, the better your English will be.
Could anybody speak more than 16 languages, Craig?
Well, there's a guy called Johan van der Walle who speaks 22 languages. And in 1987, he won the Polyglot of Flanders. I'm guessing he's Belgian. He won the contest and was tested in 22 different languages, although he has studied more. So in the competition, he needed to have 10-minute conversations with native speakers with a 5-minute break in between. So he did that in 22 different languages with only a break of 5 minutes. That's amazing.
Incredible.
Is there anyone who could possibly speak more than 22?
Funny you should ask that. Yes, we have information about someone who died a long time ago. So this is not a recent achievement. He died in 1849. That is Cardinal Giuseppe Mezzofanti. So I presume he had a connection with Italy. And he could speak between 40 to 72 languages.
Amazing.
Wow. So 14 languages.
I'm not sure if he could speak that many.
Ah, right, exactly. Well, let's say he knew 40 to 72 languages, yeah. For example, there were 14 languages which he had studied, but he didn't use. 11 languages which he could have a conversation in. 9 languages which he spoke, but not quite perfectly, but with a perfect accent. So maybe he got the grammar wrong or the pronunciation, but his accent was right.
He sounded really good, but yeah.
But that still leaves 30, which he hadn't totally mastered. That's a typical verb to talk about how good you are at a language. If you've mastered a language, you're totally proficient in it.
Imagine being his English teacher and writing on his report, could do better. Or must do better. Amazing, amazing. And if you'd like to read more about these hyper polyglots, this information comes from a website called mentalfloss.com, and there's a link in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/286. AIRC286. Now, Reza said before about knowing a language, that the Cardinal knew so many languages. What does it actually mean to know a language? What do you think, Reza?
What is to know a language?
Do you know Spanish?
Yeah, I know Spanish. I make mistakes in Spanish every day of my life, without any doubt. But I know Spanish, yeah. I can easily have a meaningful conversation, or I can have written transaction with a Spanish speaker. So I think I can say, from that point of view, I know Spanish. To me, that's what it means.
And do you know French?
I know a bit of French. I don't totally know French, but I know enough to communicate basic ideas, I think, effectively.
So I think, yeah, you're right. It really depends on what you can do with the language. And this idea of can do things, can reserve a table in a restaurant, can speak about abstract subjects, can write an informal letter, etc. These are bands or groups that appear in the CEFR, which stands for the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And we'll link to that also in the show notes. And that these can do things are linked to the level of your language. So B2, for example, you can do some things, but C1, you can do more. So I think the idea of knowing a language is, A, what do you want to do with the language? Do you want to write effectively in it? Do you want to read a newspaper in it? Or do you just want to have a basic conversation?
And by the way, don't be discouraged, don't be demotivated, don't lose your motivation if you don't get to C2 level of English ever in your life, because, ready for this piece of information, many native English speakers are not C2 level. What the Common European Framework, which designates these can-do statements, many native speakers of their own language would not get a C2 certification. So don't be depressed if you don't get a C2 certification in a foreign language, because some English speakers wouldn't get it.
And look at me, I'm a perfect example. I've lived in Spain for 22 years. I came here in 1997, and I still struggle, which means I find it difficult to read a newspaper in Spanish. And you may think, well, why, Craig? You've been here more than 20 years. Your Spanish must be perfect. No, it isn't. I still have problems with grammar, as Reza knows, when I try to speak some Spanish. And also I find it difficult to read books in Spanish because I don't practice enough. So it's a process, and all you can do is try to improve. Constant improvement and constant work.
Craig, how important do you think motivation is to successfully learn a language?
It's very important, and there are two distinct types of motivation. There's the motivation that comes from outside, extrinsic motivation. Maybe you need the qualification because of your job, or maybe your parents are forcing you to go to language classes and really you don't want to go, but your parents force you to go because you need to get good marks at school, or maybe you want the exam for another reason. That's one kind. And there's also the intrinsic motivation that really comes from inside, because you love the language, because you want to read Shakespeare in original version, because you want to travel and communicate with people in English-speaking countries. So there are different kinds of motivation, and they're very, very different, but they're all important.
Of course, we know about the external motivation. We had to, or it was certainly a very good idea for us to learn some Spanish living in Spain. Otherwise, our lives would have been very complicated and difficult.
Although my first year in Spain, I wasn't really interested in learning Spanish. I went to classes because I was living here. But when I went to teach English in the school, I spoke English. My friends were English teachers. They spoke English. I didn't really feel I needed to study hard and really learn the language in the first year. And then I met a Spanish lady, And that was my motivation, to communicate with her and to understand her and to have a conversation with her. So that was my motivation to really, really study and learn the language.
We mentioned love earlier, a very strong motivation for
Definitely.
many things in life, of course. By the way, my dad emigrated to the UK from Punjab. So his native language when he was very young was Punjabi. So when he was about 18, he emigrated to the UK and had to improve his English. He already spoke pretty good English, but he had to improve it to be able to study at university in Glasgow. And some of you might know, Glasgow in Scotland has a notoriously difficult accent to understand.
Or Glasgow, as they say, Glasgow.
Not easy. Even for a native speaker, it's not easy to understand people from Glasgow.
Even when they're sober and they haven't been drinking, they're difficult to understand. There's some information from a website called mondly.com that's also linked in the show notes. And they say that you only need about 1,500 words to have a conversation with someone in English. So you do not need to be fluent to speak to people and to be understood. Don't wait until your English is perfect, because there's a good chance it will never be. Start speaking today, because you only need about 1,500 words and you can speak to people and be understood.
Yeah, I would say that a native speaker of any language doesn't often use much more than 1,500 words in a typical day,
Right.
I would say.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't use much more than that. Think about how many words repeat in your language. So in English, words like put, go, run, set, have, come, they repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat because there are so many uses and collocations of them. In Spanish, poner, coger, ir, estar, ser, they repeat and repeat and repeat, and you can say so many things with those words. So you really don't need that many words, even in your own native language.
Absolutely. And the same website also says that to master a foreign language, and we had the word master before, to have complete control and feel very comfortable with the language, you need around 5,000 words. And interestingly, many foreign speakers of English find it easier to understand other foreign speakers of English, even from a country other than their own, rather than a native English speaker, which means a Spanish person might speak English easier with a French person or a Romanian person than an English person, which I think is true also.
I've observed it many times because they quite often make the same mistakes, but they understand each other's mistakes.
And maybe they're not so self-conscious and nervous about having perfect English because they know the other person doesn't have perfect English, so they're more relaxed and they can concentrate on the communication and not the language.
Yes. I think there are exceptions like English teachers. If they're a decent English teacher, they will have ways of speaking to students so that they're easily understood. But someone who knows nothing about teaching or languages, for example, might use many phrasal verbs in a conversation, which is very typical for informal English. Phrasal verbs, as you know, a nightmare for foreigners because they just don't make any sense to you. What's the difference between put on, put away, put up with, and put into? Why do they all mean different things to put? We don't think about it, but if you're a foreigner, that's very complicated. So as a teacher, we know, be careful with things like phrasal verbs, but an average person in the street is going to use lots of them, whereas a German, a French, a Japanese person won't. And maybe that's one of the reasons their choice of vocabulary, that other foreigners understand each other well. They don't use the tricky stuff that native speakers use.
Do you know where phrasal verbs come from originally?
No?
Originally, there was a group of 6 English professors in Cambridge University, and they were sitting around having lunch, and one of them said, "How can we make English more difficult for people to understand?" I know. Let's invent phrasal verbs. And that's no, that's not true. That's not true.
He's having us on. He's having us on.
Phrasal verb, to have someone on, to joke with them. Absolutely. So what is the most effective way to learn a language? Another one of Mariela's questions. Well, there are many different ways, and I don't think there is a more effective way. It depends on the learner, it depends on you and what you find easier. And also, I think perhaps an eclectic approach is very good, which means do different things. So that could be some self-study and studying grammar, traveling, speaking online, going to an academy, listening to this podcast. Try different things.
I couldn't agree more, yes. And Mariela asked, and what should you focus on first? Reading, speaking, listening, writing? Ideally, all of them first. Ideally, all of them. And then as you develop, well, it depends on your needs. If you're going to need to speak a lot of English, well, I guess you better focus on improving your speaking. But you need to develop all of the skills.
And another thing I'd add to that is that your listening and your comprehension is usually more advanced than your speaking. If you can imagine two circles, a big circle and a small circle inside the big circle, the big circle is your listening comprehension, what you understand, what you receive from the language, and the speaking is the smaller circle in the middle. So the aim, or what you should be concentrating on, is to make both of those circles bigger, and don't expect to be speaking better than you can actually understand when you're listening to English.
So I guess you could do the same visualization for reading and writing.
Yes.
The big circle would be reading, when you read what you understand, but writing is going to be the smaller circle inside. You're not going to be able to produce writing as high quality as the reading that you understand.
And obviously, it depends on why you are learning English. If you are learning English just to travel and speak to people when you go to North America or the UK, then maybe you don't need to concentrate so much on writing and reading. So concentrate more on listening and speaking, because you'll be doing more of that when you're traveling. But if you're passing an exam, or you want to pass an exam, obviously you need to develop all four skills at the same time.
And combine everything, as Craig said. If you can, go to an academy, do self-study, practice with native speakers, travel the world, do all of those things. And one last piece of advice from me, there's an extremely good podcast you may have heard of called Aprender Inglés con Resi, Craig. Listen to that as well. That
Why
might
not?
help.
And tell your friends to listen to it also. But the most important thing to remember is that it's a process. So instead of thinking what you can't do in English yet, think about what you can do. Now, I can't read a newspaper easily. I can't read books in Spanish, but I have traveled in Spanish-speaking countries, and it's been such a pleasure for me to communicate in Spanish while I'm traveling. So think of the good things and keep working, and you will improve gradually. So thank you very much, Mariela, for that wonderful question. That's it for us this week, and it's your turn now to practice your English. Why don't you send us a voice message? We will soon be doing an episode on Argentina, so if you live in Argentina or you know the country well, we would love to hear your comments on interesting places to visit and interesting facts about your country, or just send us a message and say hello. Reza, how can they contact us with their voice?
If you want to leave a voice message, just go to speakpipe.com/English podcast and leave your spoken message there. Or if you prefer to write, what could you do for that, Craig, if you want to practice your English writing?
Very simple. Emails to me, Craig, Craig, @inglespodcast.com, or emails to Reza at belfastreza, Reza, @gmail.com.
Self-study is good, as we said. If you want some material for self-study, you could visit the online store at store.mansioningles.net and look at some of the material there.
And before we go, we'd like to thank, as always, our wonderful patrons who contribute to the podcast, and particularly the transcriptions. You can join our Patreon program for a minimum of $1 per month, and you get access to those transcriptions. Go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Ingles podcast for more information.
We'd like to welcome our latest Patreon supporter. That is Carmen Romero, who's just signed up to the scheme. Thanks very much, Carmen. Nice to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. On next week's episode, we are going to do a review of basic verb tenses in English. The present simple, present continuous, present perfect, past simple, and going to for the future. So if you'd like to brush up your tenses and improve them, listen again next week. Thank you for listening this week. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.